Alright, so we're going to be talking about baby worrying. I want to go over just a couple of points. Now, it really doesn't matter what carrier you use, whether you use a sling carrier or a wrap or one of the more supportive carriers. Everybody's body is different and everybody is comfortable in different ones. So I really suggest that you go and try them on. Go to one of the stores that have all the different types and go try them on. See what works for you. And remember, the same one that works for your friend may not work for you. If they're 6 foot tall and you're 5'2", they probably won't. Also, as your baby grows, you may find different carriers work better, okay? So just keep that in mind. But there are some general principles of how you carry the baby and how the carrier is set up that you can take through with all the different carriers. So we're going to do a fun little experiment. I want you to grab a belt or a piece of string or something. And I want you to put it around your waist or around your hips, whichever. But let's start with around the waist. Now I don't want you to pull it tight, but, you know, comfy. So I'm going to come forward. So, not too tight. There we go. Right. Now, you got it on? What I want you to do is I want you to keep it there. So don't let it fall. How are you going to do that? Let's have a look. I can keep it there. Do you see what happened? I had to push out my stomach and arch my back in order to keep the pressure on this belt. And if I come into good posture, it's all floppy and loose again. Now, think of this as if it was your carrier. If it is not tight against you, ideally around your hips, but if it's not tight, what are you going to do? You're going to want to make the baby, or you're going to want to feel like the carrier is well supported. So if it's not tight, you're going to have to push out against the carrier. And this is number one no-no if you have diastasis. It is also very bad for your pelvic floor. So if you have prolapse or any pelvic floor issues, pushing out against something is pushing down, okay? So, number one, make sure it is tight on you, especially around the hips. So, the majority of carriers that I would suggest, now, if you're using a wrap, you can use the same ideas against this. I would suggest having a carrier which has a good strap around your hips. Now, 90% of the weight should be on your hips. You should not have any or just a little bit of weight on your shoulders. So 90% of the weight is on your hips. That means that this area needs to be nice and tight. Now, I found my old carrier, and it's not necessarily one that I would actually suggest, but it worked for me. It had extra back support. So when putting it on, I have to adjust it each time depending on what I was wearing and whether my husband had worn it prior to me. So just be aware, you may need to adjust each time. So when putting it in, so this is my hip strap, I wanted to make sure it was really good and tight around my hips so that all the weight was going there. And then tighten around the shoulders because mine doesn't have a separate chest strap here. It had a pulley at the back. So sometimes I had to get my husband to help me by shifting this so that it was tight around the back. If you have a chest strap that's in the front, make sure it's done up and it's tight, but not so that it's pulling you forward. Ideally, you would have a strap at the back so that we're pulling back, okay? So we want our shoulders supported. We should have it tight enough that there's just a little gap. So it's there for support, but not pulling your shoulders forward or back. Then we're going to milk like that, baby, or pretend baby at this point. I'm going to put the baby in. Okay, so if this is all set up correctly, you will not need to feel like you need to push out against the baby, because you are firm with your strap and you feel comfortable with it. You're not being pulled forward with the weight of the baby because your strap at the back is pulling you upright. Okay, so once you're nice and set up, then we need to think about your posture whilst carrying the baby. If your baby is in the front, it's going to be like you were pregnant. And we've already talked about our posture when we're pregnant. We have a tendency to do this. So slinging our hips forward. So if nothing else, think about just slightly bringing your hips back and leaning ever so slightly forward from the hips. Okay, not from the shoulders, from the hips, slightly forward. You want your bum to be ahead of the upper part of your body. Now, a good check, walk backwards into the wall and make sure that your bum hits before your upper body. If your upper body hits first, you are slinging your hips forward, probably clenching your glutes, okay? So, if nothing else, slight forward lean with the baby. Think about not allowing your shoulders to be dropping forward. So nice and tight in the back there. If your baby's on the back, very similar, make sure very nice and tight with the chest strap. And simply don't allow the baby to pull you backwards, okay? So that's sort of the same position as if you're hip slinging, but you might be pulled backwards more from the upper body. So again, make sure you're leaning slightly forward from the hips so that your bum hits a wall before you do. Now, it's vitally important if you have pelvic floor issues or prolapse, don't do exercise at this point with the baby in a carrier. Wait at least until you are 4 months postpartum, especially if you have any issues. And then once you are the 4 months postpartum, go slow, go low impact, see how it feels. If you experience any more leaking than you normally would, or any more symptoms of prolapse after, during, or even 24 hours after you've done an exercise class whilst wearing your baby, just don't do it yet, okay? Just simply carrying your baby in a carrier like this can put a lot of extra pressure down on your pelvic floor, so we don't want to increase the impact until you are ready for it, okay? Once you're ready for it, you can go for it, but we need to make sure that that connection breath is there, that you're not bearing down, so making sure that you're not gripping your ribs down with your abs, which is going to cause pressure going down onto your pelvic floor. So making sure that you're nice and strong, and like everything else, progress one step at a time. Okay, I hope this was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions.